Hello, Bible readers. So far in this unit, chapters 12 through 14, John has tried to unmask the powers that lurk in the first century world, where people in the churches of Asia are tempted to think it's no big deal to join a guild where, to be a member in good standing, I have to pay homage to Caesar or whatever. In that world, common sense would have told everyone, including Christians, that salvation, that is, being saved from the problems of this life, results from worshiping the beast, that is, honoring the empire and all that the empire stands for, which, of course, is all against the true God. Judgment was something Roman courts did against those who didn't play along. So with chapters 12 and 13, John reveals how things presently are. In chapter 14, he shows us how things finally are. So with the first 6 verses of chapter 14, we see a picture of the real salvation of those sealed with the mark of the Lamb. And then with verses 7 to 20, we see a picture of the real judgment of those who bear the mark of the beast. First, for the real salvation. John uses a word, purchased, that gets translated redeemed in verse 3 and again in verse 4. It's the same word that got translated as ransom in chapter 5 and buy, B-U-Y, in 13. This financial kind of transaction language connects with how the beast marks his people so that they can participate in the community's economy, right? So what John is cleverly saying here is that those who were left out of the economy of empire because they didn't have the mark of the beast, they are themselves purchased by the blood of the Lamb because of the mark they do have. The purchased, the redeemed community worships, celebrates, and are the only ones who get to learn the new song of the new age. That they are blameless, that's the word that gets used, blameless. It's not meant to say that they were perfect in order to get this reward, in order to be marked. John is saying their sacrifice as martyrs, their willingness to remain faithful unto death, that was a blameless act. And what do we do with, and it was these who did not defile themselves with women? Like, it's not that sex is dirty, as some would read this to mean. Professor Boring says defile here is being used kind of like how we would think of a radiation leak contaminating an area. In the Hebrew tradition, sex and fertility and everything associated with all that is regarded as especially potent and holds this mysterious power of life and creation. Because these forces are so powerful, they deserve our carefulness. Hebrew people ritually insulated communities, for example, from individuals who were menstruating. If you were a priest or if you were in God's army, when you were on call, you were expected to refrain from all sexual activity, not out of any moralistic dirtiness, but to insulate one sacred thing from others, because they were all very powerful things. So what this made me think of is, like, if you saw the movie Ghostbusters back in the 1980s, you might remember the Ghostbusters guns emit that stream of light. And Egon, the geeky smart Ghostbuster, says, don't cross the streams. Whatever you do, keep them separated. Why? He's asked. And he's not sure exactly, but all he can say is, it would be bad. Okay, and that's enough for the other Ghostbusters to not cross the streams until the giant Stay Puft Marshmallow Man comes down the street, but that's a whole other story. So when it comes to sex stuff on the one hand, and offering a blameless sacrifice of martyrdom on the other, John is saying, don't cross the streams. This is why he uses an image of a virgin as the ideal, just as the church is called away from being a harlot who cheats on God, like the prophet Hosea would say. So do not defile yourselves. We could say it better for our context in 2023, but I'm just explaining what John meant with these images in the first century. Okay, so that was the real salvation, what it looks like in the end. The real judgment section shows the difference between God's judgment and piddly little old Rome's judgment. Like, I can't imagine how frightening it had to be hauled into a Roman court, found guilty of a religious belief, and then sentenced to execution. Well, John can imagine this, and he knows his people can too. It is the thing that keeps people up at night. It is the thing that weakens their resolve to remain faithful unto death, to do the ministry of martyrdom. So what does John do? How does he help people make the right choice? Well, he paints a picture of God's wrath that makes Rome's executions seem very tame indeed. Those with the mark of the beast will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and the Lamb, and the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. There is no rest, day or night, for those who worship the beast. Yikes. Boring says, anyone who tries to imagine this infinitely worse than Auschwitz picture as somehow objectively real must ask whether God or John is not overdoing it here. Such a picture calls into question, he says, calls into question both justice and the character of God. So go back to my post, Making Peace with the Violence in Revelation, to get a better handle on it. But remember a couple things. John's audience, and this is the biggest thing, John's audience understood metaphor. They're not fundamentalist literalists who think, oh, well, this picture is what actually happens. His extreme metaphors, John's extreme metaphors, are meant to speak to actions that he sees as extreme. Because too many people in John's view are like, well, what's the big deal about cooperating with Rome? Is there anything worse than death after all? And John's like, yeah, the death Romans mete out is tiny, itty bitty, no big deal compared with what God can do, eternal torment. Now, is John proclaiming doctrine here? Like, is eternal torment for those marked with the sign of the beast? For those who do not remain faithful to God unto death? Is John laying out some kind of systematic theology that the church has to adopt as doctrine? I mean, what do you think? Has Revelation been a book of doctrines? Is that what John is trying to do? Hey, churches in Asia, here's a textbook for how to teach about God. No, that's not what it's been up to now. It's a pastoral letter filled with word pictures, all meant to encourage, or in this moment, scare people into remaining faithful to God unto death. That's what John is selling here in the whole letter. John's appealing to hearts more than minds. Boring says, to even ask whether Revelation teaches eternal torment for the damned is to misunderstand the book as a source of doctrines, to mistake its pictures for proposals. John's language does not deliver a doctrine about the fate of outsiders. It functions to warn insiders who are pondering the question, is it such a terrible thing to participate in Roman worship? John's like, more terrible than you can imagine, actually. Okay, so next time we're going to look at chapter 15 and 16, the 7 last plagues. We're coming to the close of the sevens and just a couple posts away from a new heaven and a new earth. I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.